Well, today's product launch day, probably, unless I'm late, in which case I can tell the future. We're not late. It's the 011 Dynamic from Lian. It's not an aluminum case from Lian. Actually, there is a little bit of aluminum. It's right here, sort of the brushed aluminum. It's an homage to themselves. And it's still a pretty good case, even though it's steel. It's folded steel. It's pretty strong. Let's do an in-depth look because I've got a build and it's Threadripper, and this is actually a really awesome build just by itself. So even before we get to the Threadripper part of the story, let's talk a little bit about Lian. They're masters of aluminum. They are wizards with aluminum. They're Al Gore of aluminum. I don't know, AL. I was trying to think of something that had to do with aluminum and never mind. This is an interesting case. It's like a mid-tower, but it's a little bit fatter than a mid-tower. It has tempered glass in the front and the side, and of course tempered glass doesn't breathe, so it's a little bit problematic. So I wanted to see how this case would perform in basically a worst case scenario. That means 4.1 gigahertz overclocked Threadripper in the Gigabyte X399 Designator, which by the way, this is overall a really good build. I've also got the G-Skill 3200 megahertz memory in this thing. Not a lot of RGB. There's a little bit of subtle RGB on the Gigabyte I/O bridge thing, but not really a lot going on here. You get the Intel 900p Optane for my primary Linux partition. I've also got the Samsung 960 Pro for my Windows partition, my Windows virtual machine. We've also got the Strix Fury. This is from Asus, but this card puts out a lot of heat. So this is pretty much a worst case scenario in terms of heat production between the Threadripper with that overclock, which produces a lot of heat, and the graphics card and all the other accessories in this computer. It's really not a good situation in terms of heat production. So what are we looking at airflow wise? Well, out of the box, this case does not come with any fans at all. You are on your own for fans, but it does have a lot of fan mounting options. One, the motherboard tray just sort of ends abruptly. And I really wanted to put in a dual socket server motherboard in this case because I think it would work, even though there are no standoffs for the front part of the motherboard. I think it's probably okay, but it's got a sort of recessed area for your radiator. And so the radiator will actually exhaust out the side here so that you get a lot of airflow out the side. And basically we found that worked. Because this is a steel construction case, there are these magnetic dust filters. There's magnetic dust filters for the bottom, the top, and the two side vents over here. We found it actually worked better when we removed the side vent for the exhaust because you don't want a dust filter on something that's an exhaust and it's just going to impede airflow, that kind of thing. It seemed like the Threadripper was better able to remove heat with this. We tried this case in a bunch of different configurations with fans, including only 3 120mm fans from the Intermax. It wasn't really enough airflow in that situation. The best fix was to add this Noctua Noctua fan to the bottom of the case, and that worked pretty well. The case doesn't come with any fan mounting screws, but we don't really see that as a big deal because most any fan that you order is going to have mounting screws anyway. But that made the biggest difference in terms of airflow. So we were bringing air in from the bottom here and sort of exhausting it out the side, and that worked okay. There was pretty good airflow in the VRM area without that, but ultimately we decided that we were going to put 2 more fans on the top drawing air in, and that created an interesting situation with the top dust filter, because you can put the top dust filter on top of the case or sandwiched between the top of the case and like the fan mounting area and the top of the case. But we found it worked better with the dust filter actually on the outside of the case. The fans that we were using, maybe too much static pressure, maybe just a quirk of the case flexing or something, but the mesh was sort of flexing into the fans themselves, which we found to be a little bit undesirable, at least in terms of an intake. We did also try the fans in an exhaust configuration, but it seemed like having the fans as an intake here and having this as a fan intake with the exhaust fans on the side from a case pressure standpoint, it seems like that was a little bit better situation than having these be exhausts and having this sort of one intake fan with basically all of our fans being exhaust. The front panel is 2 USB 3.0, that's USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A ports. There's also one USB Type C port, and it has a right angle connector. So the sort of angled grommet cable area in the front, I was able to just wrap that around, and the right angle connection worked just fine on this Gigabyte motherboard. Totally worked out. And so I have front panel USB-C on this case, which was really a nice touch. It seems like you could probably unscrew it in some places, but in other places it's riveted. So in terms of like upgradable, replaceable front panel, as you know, time marches on, don't think you're gonna get anything like that. There's also not a dedicated reset button. I kind of like having a reset button. There's no reset button here. The power LED and the hard drive LED are sort of integrated into the transparent plastic surrounding the rectangular power button. Not really a big deal. I do sort of like the brushed aluminum aesthetic of that front panel area that runs from top to bottom. But that and the Der Bauer badge are the only things that you're going to find on this case that are aluminum. Normally on most motherboards, you do have a fan, like a rear fan option that's above the motherboard that's like in this area here. This one doesn't have that. It does have some mounting options for what looks like it could be a reservoir or something like that, so you can mount your all-in-one pump reservoir, your custom loop reservoir up here in the corner, and that would work fine. It also has some interesting options for the power supply. So the motherboard mounts about 50 millimeter away from the rear side of the case, because as you can see, it's a wider case than normal, and so that's where your power supply is located. But the case can support up to 2 power supplies. If you're only going to rock one power supply, like me, I'm rocking the 1000 watt Seasonic power supply. The area where you would normally have a second power supply is occupied by a dual 3.5-inch hard drive bay. So you can take that out completely, or use it with 2 3.5-inch drives, or 2 2.5-inch drives if you want. It is a sort of toolless system for removing those drives if you want to do that. There's like clickers on the side, so you can slide it out, slide it in. That actually works pretty well. There's also this really awesome metal bar on the back side that you can use for hiding cables, but you can also mount more 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch drives there. There's also 2 3.5-inch drive mounts in the bottom of the case. You can remove those and put more fans in the bottom of the case if you so choose. The holes are there for that. You can also put a radiator in the bottom, the top, the front, well, sort of the side front, not the front, if you know what I mean. So you've got lots of options for mounting several different radiators. And again, a server motherboard, it's like, oh, I could put two radiators in this case. That would probably work really well. 2 radiators for 2 CPUs, maybe 2 EPYC CPUs. Yes, yes. Because it is thin steel. It's not really got a lot going on in terms of sound dampening. So you're not really going to see too much in terms of sound dampening. Now, I had some of these same components in the new Fractal Define R6. The Fractal Define R6, of course, has the sound dampening components and that kind of thing. Thermals in this case seem to be about the same. Again, we didn't really do super extensive testing here, but the thermals seem to be about the same as long as we had at least 1 extra fan in this configuration. But the noise level, especially when the Intermax cooler fans would ramp up a little bit, it was not as muffled as it is in the Fractal, because the fans were in the front on the R6, so a little different situation from a noise production level. This is the white case. It's also available in black. It's available with some different options. You can mount your GPUs vertically. The rear I/O area, there's no extra bars or anything, which I think is a nice touch because you can get good airflow. So if you take out the expansion slot covers, it's just wide open. So there is a vertical mount thing that you can put in there for your GPU if you so desire, so that you can have a vertical GPU. But yeah, no, I'm not really interested in vertical GPUs, so not really my thing. Not really super interested in RGB either, but this is definitely a case that you could show off your RGB. What's a negative connotation attribute? A word for an attribute that has a negative connotation? I don't know. Fetish? Your RGB fetish? Is that a thing? Yeah, you can show off your RGB fetish with this case if you wanted, because tempered glass and that kind of thing. It is pretty ingenious, the locking mechanism for this. So the top slides on, and it's got these little like slider bolt thingies, and when the top is on, the sides are sort of locked in place. But when you take the top off, the sides can slide out, and they sort of just, they're sort of toolless once the top is taken off. They just sort of slide out. But as long as they can't slide out because the top is in place, the whole thing is basically locked together. It works pretty well. If you don't have any sides on it, the structural integrity of the case is pretty good. So if you wanted to do some extreme modding on this case and run it without sides, or do your own custom side, or like replace a side with an LCD screen or something like that, maybe some ideas there for something we can do as a level 1 project, you totally could do that with this case. You could totally run that and not compromise the structural integrity, which I can't say that for a lot of cases, especially cases made from folded steel. Usually it's like, I popped the side off and now it's sort of made of aluminum foil. This is not the case. This is a good case. See, I did a pun there. It's not the case. It's a good... Never mind. I think it'll be fine. So yeah, launch day, Lian Li, Dynamic 011. Der Bauer. It's like the Der Bauer Signature Edition. I almost forgot that. Der Bauer, the super overclocking, delidding guy. Nice job, Der Bauer. He probably had something to do with the particulars of this case and like how it's laid out and all this kind of stuff. Seems like he did a pretty reasonable job. The lack of fans is perhaps concerning. There's not really a lot here in terms of, acoustical stuff, as I mentioned, but it's pretty good. It's not bad. It's pretty good little thing. It can breathe really well from the bottom. You know, they've got the magnetic dust filter for the bottom, got the plastic feet standoff. So on carpet, it would probably work okay. It'd be nice if it was a little taller, if you've got like, super shag carpeting or something. But yeah, it seems like it breathes pretty well. I'm gonna run this Threadripper system in it for a while and see how that works out for me. I would put another system in it that just came in, but I can't talk about that one yet. So yeah, I don't know. If you decide to pick up one of these, or you want to show off your build, or you know somebody that has a really amazing build and they'll let you put pictures of it on the forums, you should come to Level 1 Techs. I'm Wendell, I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.